Hello, Mech fans. This is Duncan Fisher. Hold on firmly to your mana potions, fireballs, and familiars, because you are tuning in to your regularly scheduled episode of the First Circuit Podcast.
And with that, hello and welcome to the First Circuit Podcast, episode number 157. Today, we're not going to be talking about MechWarrior Online yet again, sorry about that. Today, we're going to be talking to a person instead. I know social interactions are weird for us, but hello, Chris. Welcome to the First Circuit Podcast.
Hey, everyone.
So yeah, today we have the special guest, Chris Lowrey from Piranha Games, also potentially known for his work for Catalyst Games, and we're going to be talking all about his person and his work on mostly the Kestrel Lenses DLC. Dang it, Chris, now I kind of took away your intro. Sorry about that, but who are you and how might people know you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Lowrey. I am a freelance designer and artist that works for Piranha Games as a senior systems designer and for Catalyst Games as a 3D modeler and illustrator.
Yeah.
I got a question. What is a senior system designer? Like, what does that entail, and what is that exactly?
Oh man, that's a complicated question. For the most part, a systems designer is the one who pretty much designs the underlying systems for a lot of the game systems. So for MechWarrior 5, for example, like I was the one who was primarily focused on scripting the weapons and mech markets. So when you travel to a system, kind of the underlying systems that kind of control like what mechs and what weapons populate the system markets and whatnot.
Okay.
So in your case, it's actual game systems rather than the technology other people use to make game systems.
Yeah, like I'm not really necessarily on the engine side so much as the engineers will tell me what I'm capable of doing, and lots of blueprint scripting for what I do, as well as weapon tuning for things like the Heroes of the Inner Sphere. There was a lot of new weapons introduced that I would have to pretty much work on tuning and implementing. But for the most part, a lot of the systems design is mostly focused on quest progressions and other like kind of mundane things, like making sure the market's working is like the big thing that I was focused on.
I got a question. Like, did you go to a lot of lore when you actually went, say, like Davion has certain types of mechs in that type of system, or the area type thing, like when you actually put the mechs in there?
So in MechWarrior 5, that's mostly controlled by all the mechs have a faction affiliation that we pulled directly from the master unit list that Catalyst produced. And we basically looked at both the random assignment tables and the master unit list to determine faction availability at certain points in time in the Succession Wars era. And we've pretty much populated the enemy list for the factions for encounter rates for different types of mechs for different kinds of factions. Like that, and we basically just use the same encounter list for the enemies in the markets to populate that side of things as well. So if you're looking for those catapult K2s, and stuff like that, that's a Korea manufactured mech, so you're going to most likely find that in Korea space. If not, you're going to have to look at the rare mech drops, which kind of disregards the entire faction availability stuff.
Okay. Like one other question actually. For MechWarrior 5, I'm actually doing heroes. Basically trying to get all the hero mechs. Okay. Is there a certain hopefully it's going to be a spoiler or something. Is there a certain way to get all the hero mechs in different markets, or where are they, or how's that work? Basically, how's the algorithm work?
So for the hero mechs, those are considered part of like the rare mech pool. So it doesn't even though the heroes are mostly affiliated with certain factions or whatnot, you can kind of find the heroes in different factions. The main draw with the hero mechs is going to be difficulty of the markets itself. So early game markets are kind of tuned to early game mech pools. So if you're trying to target like light and medium hero mechs, going to those early game markets might give you a bigger chance of targeting those light and medium mechs, whereas if you're going for heavy and assaults, the later game markets, will have those in the pool. And as you get into the later game markets, the way that we have the hero mech distribution right now for Under the Hood is basically that they just effectively get added to the pool. Nothing gets removed from the pool. So you can have an equal amount of finding any hero mech in the higher end markets, but if you really want to target those light and mediums, you can probably go to the games easier markets.
Okay.
And then you'll find them more frequently.
Because like I think I have like 29 of the heroes. I'm trying to get. I think there's like 49. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to get them all.
Something like
Almost.
I lost track of the count around Heroes of the Inner Sphere because we introduced all those hero mechs in that one.
Yeah. True.
And yeah, there's a lot of mech variants, and there's kind of another designer that's mostly focused on the implementation and to the picking of all those mech variants.
Okay. Pretty cool, by the way.
Yep. A lot of work to go around. So
Bob has had his personal coaching session now for his mech collection quest.
Oh yeah.
We're super off structure and off our usual thing anyway, but super specific questions. Your enemy spawn tables, are they on a mech by mech basis or on a lance basis? So are lance compositions random or fixed?
It's a little bit of both. So the way that the enemies pick the mechs is that they at first pick a formation, and that formation will basically be, okay, I'm going to try to either have a mixed group of both mechs and tanks or a full lance of mechs. And then there's different types of lances that kind of be formed from that. And we drew a lot of that from the lore, like fire lances, scout lances, skirmish lances, and what they will do is they will try to find specific mech types that fit in those specific mech roles, and depending on the allocation of points, because we basically have something similar to battle value for the mechs that determines like how much they have to spend on an enemy unit for a certain spawn. They will go to the faction availability table, and then they will make random rolls based on the role that they're looking for. So if they're looking for a missile boat, they'll basically cull the faction table of any kind of mech with a missile boat tag in it, and then they'll do a random roll based on the availability of that mech in that said faction.
Cool.
So if you go to the mech data table in the operations tab and actually see the faction availability list in the I guess in like the upper right hand corner of the screen, that does feed a lot into how the enemies spawn in the missions.
Okay, good to know actually.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering about how it works compared especially to the Hairpin Schemes Battletech, which is obviously fixed lances all the time, which makes modding also a bit harder for that game. But let's potentially take a step back and ask some of our usual starting questions.
We went off.
So, we went way into the deep end, but
and sorry for the complete technical dumps.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
We love it here.
Yeah, actually, we love it, so it's all good.
I'm one of the ones who has to deal with like the physical implementation of how things are on the back end. So it's one of those things where if you ask me a technical question, I could probably explain it to you. But for some people, that's just like they don't. It's all Greek to them. So
yeah, okay. Let's do something for the people who have nothing to do with tech. How did you get involved in the Battletech franchise as a whole?
Oh man, like I think. So when I was so I got into the Battletech franchise when I was really young, at about 8 years old, when I was in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts at the time, and I was basically on one of the camping trips where they would take all the kids out into the woods, and I remember that that weekend that we were going up, it pretty much rained almost the entire weekend, and one of the older, kids that was pretty much one of the counselors had a copy of TRO 3025, and 8-year-old me was obsessed with this very old movie that some might have heard of called Empire Strikes Back,
Mm-hmm.
because at the time when Empire came out, the entire Walker sequence on the Battle of Hoth was pretty much the only time I, as a kid, have ever seen these mechanical things basically advancing into shooting things and everything like that. And it's hard to imagine that at the time, like there's that was it. Like when it came to representations of that kind of mechanics on the screen. And so when I saw TRO 3025 by the kid, I recognized like the Goliath.
Yeah.
I always thought as the Goliath as pretty much an AT-AT, and so I instantly latched onto it, and pretty much throughout the rainy Boy Scout trip, pretty much read through TRO 3025, and pretty much went home. And my mom at the time picked up the box set for Battletech Second Edition when we were going on a family trip at some point in time. And from there, I pretty much was hooked onto the franchise. And then many years later, when I was a teenager, I ran demos for like a local team, ran leagues for the tabletop, and even when WizKids was forming the ClickTech boxes together, I actually traveled down to San Diego to meet Jordan for the first time, and pretty much help him with the demoing of Battletech
Okay.
from in the Comic-Con down there, like when it was being first unveiled for like at least the ClickTech game.
Well, that's
So
cool.
yeah, so from there I pretty much went to university, kind of put it in the back of my mind because I had to focus on my career. But then 10 years in the career, I had a friend that was that was involved with PGI's production team, and I pretty much kind of were helping them out on a pro bono basis, just because I was in a different spot in my life, different role, also in the video game industry, but much more on the mobile side, and kind of didn't really. I was kind of on my way out of that kind of game, and I wanted to get back into console and PC games. So I pretty much was working with Piranha, pretty much on a pro bono basis, working through a friend. But then at one point in time, like when I left my studio job and became a freelancer, and hooked up with a friend in Florida that was running a few freelancing gigs here and there. The freelance work became so much more important that I basically told Russ like, hey, I gotta quit the pro bono stuff, and they're just like, okay, well pretty much finish up your contracts, and then once you're done with your contracts, come talk to us. And since then I've been working with them for a little over 5 years now.
Wow, that's cool. Huh.
So I have another completely random and off-topic question. You watched Empire Strikes Back at the age of 8. How did your parents react when the hand got cut off?
I mean, it was cartoon. It was a different time. I mean, and also my family kind of was demented in that they would let me watch anything. Like they let me watch. They took me to go see T2 in theaters. I remember specifically like they didn't mind me watching Alien 3 when it first came out in theaters either. Like it was
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like T2 I watched in theaters too. I think I was in high school back then, and it was a line around the block, based around the theater, just to get in. It was nice. It was cool.
And likes to date himself.
Yeah, I like to date myself there.
Yeah. Well, I think I did date myself as well by basically saying that Empire is like the only robotic battle you see on screen, because nowadays you can. I think that like a movie a year comes out with that kind of stuff on screen these days with the Marvel movies and whatnot.
Yeah, true.
So, how did you get from, or first off, what did you study in university, and how did you make the jump from that to the game industry in general?
So, I entered the game industry when I was in high school, working at a mom and pop retailer within the Bay Area called Network Video, and we were significant in at least the local region because we were a mom and pop store that specialized in import games and movies. and we ended up actually servicing a lot of the Bay Area's media market when it came to previewing video game consoles from Japan at the time. So I mean, it's hard to believe in this day and age of global releases, but back when, say, like the N64 or the PlayStation came out, there was almost a lead time of 6 months, and in the cases of like some of the Final Fantasy games, sometimes like a year and a half between when it releases in Japan and when it released in the Western countries. And so, what a lot of the local media markets like Tech TV would do is come and grab the N64s for the Japanese market, or the Panasonic GameCubes that would never even come to the local market.
Yeah.
And pretty much grab it from us. And so while I was working that job, one of the people who worked with me was actually a level designer at a local game studio that was kind of pretty much my friend, but also instructed me as to, like, when I went to university, what to focus on to really get into the game industry to really become attractive to anyone who was hiring in the industry. So when I went to university, and this is like very much reminiscent of the time, because at this point in time it's not like this anymore, but you only really could go in at the time as either an artist or a programmer, because designers at the time, back in like the days of the early PlayStation 1, were kind of more advanced jobs that people grew into, and the entry level jobs at the time were either QA, something to do with art, something to do with coding. So I came in on the art side, went to university for arts and animation, got out of the university and immediately started working in actually more on the film side. So I did a lot of stuff for National Geographic specials and Adult Swim shows from like the Super Jail and Xavier days.
Oh wow.
And then after that, we finally got on contracts with video games. So things that like a lot of licensed games. I was working on the cinematics teams for those games, and that pretty much led into work, doing jobs for, like, back in the day, Facebook games and mobile games and other kind of small console gigs. And pretty much when I was working in the mobile game field is when I was pretty much like, I kind of want to focus on what I want to make, because when you're just starting in the industry, you kind of take whatever job you can get to get the experience in there. And so when the opportunity presented itself, when Russ offered me the position, I immediately grabbed it and have been working with them ever since.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the advice that we've been hearing from a lot of people.
Yeah.
If you want to get in, just take whatever you can and cross-pollinate too. That's the just in general advice you would give people who want to take that career path.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot easier today than it was in my days, because when I was in university, like you went to university because there was the Silicon Graphic computers. There were like computers specifically made to do CG, because home PCs weren't able to really do that kind of work at the time. But nowadays, like, you can pretty much get a professional level rig just by going to Best Buy and pretty much picking up stuff off of Amazon and Newegg and whatnot, and things. A lot of professional scale tools are free these days, so you can get the complete Unreal Engine completely for free. Same with Unity. You can get GIMP if you want to learn Photoshop and get that for free. If you want to learn 3D, Blender is free. So there's all these free professional level resources that you can get nowadays that didn't exist when I was around. If you're interested in making this stuff, there's no excuse to pretty much kind of sit on the side and say, oh, you can't do it, because if you really wanted to pursue it, the resources are out there now that you can go and get it.
Yeah.
And if making games is the career path you want to do, I highly advise to do your research and just go out and try it.
Yeah. And then I have one final career-related question. How do you market yourself, if you even still market yourself?
Not enough, unfortunately. my LinkedIn is so out of date at this point in time. I mostly market myself as a systems designer right now, mostly because that's what I do. But I do, still say that I have 3D skills for art positions, but that's not really like that's kind of like if I need some money on the side and there's a side gig that will pay out for like 2 or 3 months that I need, I can kind of rely on that skill set. But for the most part, I'm marketing myself as a designer because that's where I always wanted to go. It's just that you know at the time when I was getting my education, there wasn't dedicated design paths like you see today. So.
Yeah, and I have a feeling if you're only doing 3D stuff on the side, it's pretty hard nowadays to keep up with all the super talented people who just do it full time and are super efficient in their workflows and stuff.
Yep, there's a lot of that, and for 3D, it's a lot of who you know, and also what are you willing to do for as many hours as you can. And like that was fine when I was just out of uni and really trying to make an a myself for in the industry. But now that I'm kind of a little bit older and settled in, to a skill set and have a wife and everything like that, I'm much more into the technical side of things because that's a little bit more meaty work for me, but also something that usually results in long-term positions instead of 6 months to a year of just asset creation gigs.
Asset creation gigs.
Yep.
And what exactly is that?
Basically, when you do the base things that you're going to populate your world with, like a tree.
Okay.
Creating the 3D models for a tree, the texture and that kind of stuff. That's asset creation.
Okay.
Yeah, you're contracted for like half a year to make trees, and then they're right, we got enough trees. We don't need trees last day before the game launches.
Especially nowadays, you just go outside with a camera, photograph a tree a couple times, and get an automatic 3D model that's really good.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do for Catalyst, because I worked on the miniature production side of things for them for this latest Kickstarter. But that's definitely like a side gig that I took on more for like the COVID days than really the full-time job that I have.
What I've often hearing is you have mostly 2D references to create your other 2D stuff and 3D stuff off, and in your case you're using 3D references basically.
Yeah, like there is a design team with people like Shimmering Sword and Anthony and Bishop Steiner, as well as Marco Manzoni, like that do a lot of like the orthographic design stuff that will build the 3D models off of. But when it comes to like the TRO illustrations or the cover art and stuff like that, they really want to pretty much create 3D models to assist the illustrators to really knock out really high quality work, very quickly.
Yeah, get the proportions right, perspective, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, and for anyone listening, Patreon, Shimmering Sword, and Bishop Steiner both, I can highly recommend.
I'll send links down below.
But I believe you had another question.
Me? I had a question?
You sounded like that.
What, me?
I've been thinking for a while, but no, I was because I do actually want to hear more personally about the Catalyst games stuff before we get into MechWarrior 5, since at least we started with MechWarrior 5.
So, like, what's the question for it then?
What would you like to know about it?
Yeah, put you on the spot.
Put you on the spot here.
Yeah.
I mean, he's done these 3D models, and he's also done the illustrations and whatnot as well for the Catalyst, and I assume that's what for the. Do they just contract you for basically, mech designs, or do you do anything with the lore?
For Catalyst, no. For Catalyst, it's purely the Mech 3D models and the illustrations for the rec guides at the moment. Because my my availability for work for Catalyst is very limited because my primary work is all the stuff I work on for MechWarrior. So it's really just kind of getting those odd jobs here and there based on my availability. Like I owe, like currently with them, I guess I can say that I owe Anthony right now a Kodiak illustration for the rec guides that are coming up. So that's like kind of what I'm doing on the side there. But that stuff is like very piecemeal compared to what I work on with Piranha.
So how's the contracting process for you? Do you just have like everyone has your email, and if they want something, they message you, or do you actively look for work at Catalyst?
Well, it depends on the client. I am a freelancer, so pretty much I take on work where I can find it. But I am with Piranha. I'm under a long-term contract that's pretty much locks me into full-time work, and then anything I take on after that is really just kind of asking Anthony, hey, I can do a mech model here and there. Just toss me something if you got anything, and they'll say if they have anything or not. There are a few people who work with Catalyst full time, but for me, like my primary job is on the MechWarrior side of things, and I do the Catalyst stuff more as either a hobby or stuff that keeps me sane as we're constantly being locked down with COVID and everything like that. If it wasn't for COVID, I probably wouldn't have been able to knock out as many mechs for the Wave 2 Kickstarter as I did.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of deja vu. Bob, don't you feel like we've heard this kind of story before?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, for everyone we talked to.
Yeah, seems to be a common theme with the whole Catalyst contract work. So I don't know if you're willing to talk about this, but as a European, I'm quite interested in what's the difference between working for PGI full time and working as a freelancer for a long-term contract company. Can you talk about that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, because I work with PGI as a long-term contractor.
Yeah, like what's your reason for going the freelance with a long-term contract side rather than just applying at PGI and working for them? Is there a difference?
It's more of a personal thing for me because my wife works in the area that we live. We have family in the area, and so if I was to take on a full-time studio gig, not only would I have to immigrate up into Canada, but my wife would have to pretty much put her career aside and try to find something that she could do up there and everything, as well as saying goodbye to family and whatnot. So it's one of those things where there's no kind of monetary benefit or anything like that to me. It's really just more of a personal thing, like for how my family is set up, and trying to find something that allows me to pursue my career with the least amount of disruption for the rest of my family.
Makes perfect sense, actually. It makes perfect sense.
But yeah, like, it's definitely something that I know a lot more people are able to do in these days of COVID. Like it's kind of odd because I actually had the opportunity to pretty much come on to Piranha and do this kind of work before COVID, which I'm very grateful for, because it has allowed me to stay close to family, and has allowed my wife to kind of not have to quit her job and pretty much restart her career for the sake of my own career. But I am pretty much a member of the team, and in some cases I do have to go up to Canada for extended periods of time to make sure that I work with the team. So I'm definitely still there in the room with everyone. It's really just what works best for me and my family at the moment right now. But you never know. Like I might find myself immigrating up to Canada. I might not. It just depends on how my life pans out with everything else going on in it outside of the day job.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I loved being up there for like MechCon, and it's just beautiful. Like especially beautiful place.
Oh yes,
good people too.
Lead us on.
Oh no, I'm just saying it's just a beautiful place. I love being up there.
Oh yes,
good people, good food, and just had a lot of fun when I was up there meeting everybody.
No, if
Bobby a streamer, no, you need to segue that into another
question.
No,
if I was a streamer, like, okay, so I'm taking the +5 sword and going to put it inside this, and I'm pretty sure going to be casting the spell on the spawn. Yeah, That's streaming. That's all streaming really is.
Bob is the voice here for chaos.
Yes.
Ian, you're supposed to counterbalance.
Come on,
it.
counterbalance me, man.
Okay, counterbalance. Beautiful food, beautiful people. Who else is beautiful people? PGI is beautiful people.
Beautiful people. There you go. Okay.
So you said earlier you had kind of transitioning from MechWarrior Online to MechWarrior 5 about 6 weeks before MechWarrior 5 launched. Are you still involved in MechWarrior Online at all?
Oh, months.
No, I have been involved in MechWarrior Online for years at this point. I think I've now been working on MechWarrior 5 more than I've been working on MechWarrior Online. I kind of transitioned over to the MechWarrior 5 team about 6 months before the game released, and I pretty much had to fly up to Canada to work on site at the studio for a bit to pretty much get as much done as possible before the game's release. And since working on that, I've pretty much been stationed on the MechWarrior 5 side of things.
Yeah, and then for Orchestra Lenses, you took over the role as a narrative designer. Was that more of a someone needed to do it and you were qualified for it, or was that something you actively wanted to do?
It was a little bit of both, because especially when dealing with the more lore-focused storylines, it's one of those things that we know the fan base really has. They have a high quality bar to hit, and we want to make sure that we hit it. So it was one of those situations where, like, while my primary role on the team is more on the systems design side, it was one of those things where, because we chose to go down the path of a narrative campaign that heavily focused on narrative elements from the novel series and everything, we knew that we had to hit that bar, and so we knew that we needed to hit it, and no one else really on the team at the time was in a position to really research the sheer amount of stuff that needed to go into putting the campaign together. So it was one of those things where it had to get done, and so I just pretty much said, hey, I know the franchise, I know the systems for how the quest systems are set up and everything, so I can pretty much get this done.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to admit I was very surprised how accurate to lore the Orchestra Lenses campaign was.
Yeah,
oh yes,
true.
I was rereading the novels immediately before.
This whole pile right here is
pretty
much.
Yeah. I did not expect you guys would nail it down this much, but yeah, good job on that.
Yeah, actually, I read the lore. I'm like, it's like, oh, well, that's cool. They actually put a lot of good stuff inside there, and they did a good job. You guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and especially the Magistry of like Canopus as well. You did a great job on that one. Awesome job, by the way. I loved it.
Pop's like, I got mentioned. My faction is official.
My faction got mentioned finally.
So, what was the process? Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Oh, don't thank me yet on that front. So, well, I see one of the questions that you have listed out for me, and you might not like that quest line so much, Bob, once we get to some of these later questions that you have listed out here.
Oh boy. All right, then let's get on with the next question. And how was the process, or what was the process of deciding the DLC's theme? And I mean, later on, we can talk about the primary content of it.
So, the fourth succession war was never a guaranteed thing when it came to Legends of the Kestrel Lancers. So as we were kind of approaching the tail end of productions for Heroes of the Inner Sphere, production came to the design team and basically outlined a few requirements for us to pretty much coincide with stuff that art production had already started. Because I'm not sure if how much people are aware, but in video game production, different departments work at different rates because they both onboard and offboard at different times. And so by the time design was wrapping up with Heroes of the Inner Sphere, art production was already knee-deep in creating assets for the mech factory, the crashed ship, the jungle biomes, and a whole bunch of other art resources. And so production basically came to design and said, here are the pieces that are already in production and that we are not going to be able to change. We need the the next DLC that we had decided at that point in time to focus on the mini campaign as we called it at the time, to incorporate those things such as the mega city and the jungle biome. And so it was kind of the initial work that I did on Legend of the Kestrel Answers was determining, okay, all these kind of disparate pieces of stuff that was already in production, how can we string this together into something that is pretty much something that we could deliver on. And so we kind of came up with bronze, silver, and gold ideas for how we can get this together based on the amount of resources that we could commit to it. So at kind of like the bronze level was the idea that we would take all those pieces and structure a narrative campaign out in the periphery, like the Magistracy of Canopus, and have an entire campaign kind of in those unpopulated regions of space where we can add new war zones, new industrial zones, and pretty much take players out into the periphery, so to speak, and work within the existing systems that we had, and deliver on something that was still structured very similar to like how it was in Heroes of the Inner Sphere, where it was kind of just like the story is kind of disconnected from anything else in the timeline, so we're not under any kind of time pressures to really do anything. So you can kind of take the story at your own pace. So that was kind of like one of the ideas that we had at like the lowest level of implementation.
Well, I like it. I like that one. But
oh yeah, no. But a lot of the ideas for that kind of full campaign got kind of consolidated down into the quest line for the Canopus quest line for what ultimately got into Legends of the Kestrel Answers. But we were thinking of like almost an entire campaign structured around that at one point. The next rung up was pretty much the Andurian crisis, which is when
that would have been nice.
Yeah, which is when pretty much a region of House Merrick space breaks off and creates this four-way conflict, between House Merrick, the Andurians, House Lao, and the Magistracy of Canopus, all in this four-way battle, and we were going to, probably structure something around that, mostly because that allowed a little bit more of our sandbox, because the Andurian crisis is a crisis that actually takes place over a 10-year period of time. And so that kind of boxed us in as far as like how we pretty much wanted to allow the players to proceed, but still allowed players like 10 years of sandbox to pretty much get around to the storyline. So it wasn't as strict as the last option, which is what the Fourth Succession War was. And the challenges of the Fourth Succession War were pretty much that this is a very well-documented event that took place in very specific regions of space under very specific regions of time. And so the big challenge when it came to pitching, the Fourth Succession War, at least internally, was that we would have to build out a lot of systems that would strip out a lot of the sandbox experience that you got through the base game and put you on a much more rigid path through a very rigid series of events that are bracketed off on a very linear time. And so it was definitely a point of discussion where we were going back and forth between all three options because obviously there's a lot. We knew that there's a lot of interest in the Fourth Succession War, but there's also a lot of technical work that had to go into it. But I think that we got a game plan together, and it's a testament not just to production, but the entire team basically got together and said it's going to be a lot of work, but to get all these new systems in. But man, like if we can deliver on this, this sounds amazing. And so we pretty much committed to getting the nose to the grindstone, getting the work done, and it's really kind of one of those cases where the entire team came together to really deliver on Kestrel Answers, not just any individual person.
You're actually right about that, even though I like the other two. Don't get me wrong. You are right about the lore, though, as far as like the Andurian War doesn't really have much. Has a couple paragraphs, basically like you could find different types of books about that war, and to produce the amount of stuff you would produce compared to the Fourth Succession War has so much involved as far as lore, what systems were attacked by what, all that kind of stuff. You did a good job on that. Even though like the other two,
Oh, yeah.
you still did a good job.
Well, that's the biggest question when it came to what we wanted to take on with what became Legends of the Kestrel Lancers was, do we want to preserve the core open sandbox experience and kind of have events happen off to the side of the mainline events to allow players to kind of take things at their own pace, and if they chose to fly off for 10 years and come back and take the story as they wanted to, or did we really want to immerse them in some of like the bigger lore experiences that are there? And so basically, like the Periphery gave us an opportunity to pretty much just have the wide open space. The Endurian Crisis pretty much allowed us to have a lot of flexibility within a 10-year period of time. But whereas the Fourth Succession War was like completely, you are going here at this very specific time, and you only have this much time to get stuff done. I'm really happy that it wasn't just any one person, but the entire team said, yeah, let's do that.
It definitely felt like that too, playing the Kestrel Lancers. It's like, oh my god, I can't fix this. Like, I need to do this. And so like you're kind of pressured to just kind of advance forward of what you had, and that's it. And I definitely did like that. It was good.
Though, to be fair, the balancing options you put into that with the ability to just buy fresh mechs off the market if you're in a really bad spot and stuff like that, it makes it really flexible and not that difficult if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing to remember about MechWarrior 5, and just a MechWarrior as a franchise, is that we're very well aware that MechWarrior, for a lot of people in the Battletech community, is effectively an onboarding point for how players first encounter this entire IP. If you ask even people like Anthony Shimmering Sword, he initially got into this IP through MechWarrior 4, when he was a teenager, and a lot of the people that you have, and like I'm old enough to remember when MechWarrior first came out, and chat boards like Lords of the Battlefield, were around that completely bashed how MechWarrior 4 flubbed the implementation based on what everyone experienced from MechWarrior 3. But MechWarrior 4 made their design choices based on what was best for people just kind of approaching the franchise, and we very much kind of took a similar mantra when it came to producing MechWarrior 5. So we know that for skilled mech warriors, like our games might be not necessarily be that easy, but for those people who are just coming to MechWarrior and struggling just to get their mech to go the direction that they want to, we wanted this to be an enjoyable experience, not just for the long-term fans, but also for those people just encountering the game for the first time.
Yeah. As much as we here disagree with some of your principles, like especially MechLab, it makes total sense in this context too. Make it option. Like I'm right now forcing myself to not use any of the buy options and just take what I'm given in the Kestrel Lancers campaign, and it's a good balance. And I appreciate having the option to do that or doing something else. And speaking of options, now that you have kind of both systems, the like linear campaign with a fixed timetable and the more open stuff, do you have any insight what players prefer and what you might be doing for future campaigns?
We're definitely reviewing what players have been saying about Kestrel Lancers, but and we are going to structure that for any kind of future updates. But as much as people like the campaign, one thing to kind of note about Kestrel Lancers is that we were only able to really deliver on that kind of campaign because we invested purely in that campaign. So I know that a lot of people were for as many people as there were excited that that the Fourth Succession War and those more lore events were really central to their enjoyment of Kestrel Lancers. There's also kind of the other side of the coin where pretty much we have seen the players who also have said, well, I really wanted more mechs. I really wanted more weapons, more things that actually interact with in the game itself. And it's when it comes to future content, it really comes down to on our side, we only have so many resources to allocate. Even for me, I was only a narrative director on Legends of the Kestrel Lancers because there was such a focus on story for that one. Whereas in Heroes of the Inner Sphere, I was mostly on the weapon design for things like the heavy rifles and the short burst lasers and whatnot, as well as those particular quest lines. So there's a different degree of effort that it takes to kind of produce this said content. And so if we go in one direction or another, it really just depends on where we feel players will get the most value when it comes to the content that we produce, and whether that leans heavier on the gameplay side of things or heavier on the narrative side of things is really going to come down to both the feedback that we get from the players, as well as what resources we have available on the team to really tackle those things.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't ever please everyone, and I think the Steam reviews in particular have shown a pretty clear picture of the divide in the first few days after release.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that we take to heart, and if there is like another update to the game or another DLC, we'll pretty much try to feel what we feel adds the most amount of value to the game. But as to what that content would be, it really just depends. It's basically a sliding scale between like physical game content that players can interact with, or that more custom narrative content that is pretty much makes those kind of more scripted events really meaningful, but at the same time also you play it once and you don't interact with it again. So it's it just comes down to like where we feel we get the most bang for our buck in that regards, as well as providing the most value to the players.
Now, like, I have to ask this question. There's a two-part to this. Now, as far as future DLCs, like, I'm not sure if we could talk about it because of NDAs and everything, but War 3039, the Andarian Crisis, basically as far as the next DLCs, like as far as different things you could put in there. And the second question is, everyone's asking us, clans, is it going to be like MechWarrior 6 as far as a completely different engine, or is it just going to be a DLC that starts at 3050 or something?
I'm glad this question actually came up because I know it comes up a lot, and I've even talked about it on Reddit before, and there seems to be a lot of misinformation going around, or misinterpretations of things. So let me try to clear this up as best as I can, while staying within my NDAs and everything. So we will never discount ever making the clans. The clans technically are within our timeline for the game. They come in at the very tail end of the timeline, but the invasion starts in 3048. So there's pretty much 2 years of timeline within our current game where the clans technically do exist, and we do hint to them in news articles and stuff like that.
Yeah, I read those.
Yeah. Now, with that said, this all comes down to expectations for what it would take to successfully deliver on the promise of the clans. And if we were to tackle it in, say, like a DLC, the DLC content would pretty much have to be about the same size of content that you would see in a Heroes of the Inner Sphere or a Kestrel Lancers. Not both of them combined, but either or. And so if it was just coming down to, say, mech content that exists within our current systems, then it's not, we have the mechs there from MWO, so there's always the possibility to put it in. But the question always is that what players really want when it comes to the clans? And like, do you just want them as effectively a content dump like Heroes of the Inner Sphere, or do you want them as like pretty much their own full-on campaign?
Be their own full-on thing, basically.
Yeah, and so when it comes to that, the question then becomes, what is the best way that we can address that, knowing what our budgets are and what, we're capable of doing, and whether that means it's, pretty much we're just never going to touch the clans, whether that means that we're going to do them as a DLC or a full-on new release. That I don't know. That's very much way above my pay grade when it comes to how much we can deliver on. But I think the important thing to kind of get out into the community and discuss is that if we were to take them on as a DLC to MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries, the size of that DLC would effectively have to be equivalent to what you see in Here's the Inner Sphere or Legend of the Kestrel Lancers, just for the sake of that is what we can produce with the budgets that we have available to us. And if it's anything beyond that, is kind of like the baseline, then it might be something that either shouldn't be touched for MechWarrior 5 or should be touched with a completely different product beyond MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries. And like I said, nothing is decided on that front.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that anyone who tells you that we're definitively doing something is at this point completely speculating, because we have not made those decisions. We're still waiting on sales results from Kestrel Lancers, so we need to monitor how well the current the recent release on PlayStation 5 as well as the Kestrel Lancers has done. And we'll pretty much have to evaluate what the sales figures are for future plans that we have in the works, and if we believe that that results in a budget and a staff that is confident that we can deliver on the clans within the set parameters, then we would definitely love to do it internally. Like, we know how much of a big touch point it is. We have like the assets around, so it would very much be a great thing for us to do. But the budget has to make sense, because we don't want to necessarily kill ourselves on the development team to deliver something that we know has kind of built-in sky high expectations if we were to take it on.
It does. Everyone's talking. Everyone's like,
yes,
fuming at the mouth for it, basically. But
we're well aware of that, and we would love to do it, but if we were to do it, we would want to do it right, and what that looks like is going to be very dependent on how successful everything else that we've already produced does.
I mean, probably to do it right, though, you would actually have it before actually the invasion, where they actually have to fight, like in trials, to go fight each other on different planets and stuff like that before they come to the inner sphere. That way you can have it completely separate from the inner sphere, don't have to worry about that stuff, and just have the clan assets, that's it.
That's only if we do the invasion, though. Like,
that's before the invasion, though. That's before it. That's when they're fighting each other. But I don't know.
Because like even if we do the invasion, that does mean that some of those MechWarrior Online mechs that were very much centered in the Civil War, and also those weapon systems that people like from MWO, like heavy lasers, MRMs, and stuff like that, just would not be in the timeline for the base invasion. So the question would be, would we even want to do an initial invasion timeline, or is it more appropriate to pick something a little bit further down the line, like pretty much one off the top of my head would be the Combine Ghost Bear War, or the Hell Horses invasion and stuff like that.
True.
Or hell, even going into the early Jihad, since the MechWarrior Online has kind of early Jihad weapon systems in the game.
Yeah.
So it just comes down to like what do players want, but at the same time, what fits our production goals and our budget. So.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and with the whole budget discussion, I assume doing a double-size DLC for $40 is also completely dependent on current sales figures, right?
Well, I mean, that also comes down to pretty much, player reaction to if we were to offer something that expensive. Our base game right now, I think, is either I think it's $40 for the base game. So. If we were to offer pretty much a $40 DLC, even if it was double size, to many players that is basically like doubling the cost of the game itself. And is that really like the right path to take, or would you rather have it as say a $50 or $60 like separate game at that point if you're going up all the way to 40 anyways?
Yeah.
Well, that's something for the whole market research people to figure out.
Oh yeah, yeah, and
Exactly.
Yeah.
that's the thing I want to stress the most out of all this is that nothing has been decided yet. We're still waiting on the sales results for both PlayStation launch and the Kestrel Lancer stuff. So at this point, it really is up to a lot of factors that are completely out of people like me's hand. And
Yes.
despite the fact that the entire team would love to, deliver on something like that, it really just depends to, what EG7 and what, Piranha Management wants to do at this point. So,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In my head, a little bit, it's just like talking about the clans and all, all the sales thing and stuff. It's all very big picture. People always, can look at, try and imagine the big picture in the future because we don't know all the particulars. But to try and bring it more small scale, at least on my head, it's like, with each DLC, you add more tools to the toolbox. But ultimately, at least with the Kestrel Lancers, it was a chance for a more narrative focus. And at least my personal preference is like, I want to hear more of just like, how we can, even if it's not a big, huge money winner, storytelling is still an important part of the game making process. And for me, I want to hear not just, oh, is this worth it for the money side of things, but these are the tools that we've worked on. These are the tools we're improving. I want to hear somebody who's actually advocating for stories within PGI to continually improve, even if it's just a small part of the process.
Oh yeah. No, I would love to produce further content like Legends of the Kestrel Lancers. And to kind of speak on the tool side, you're absolutely right. As we pretty much are building these DLCs, we are creating new tools that we currently didn't have before. Like as I kind of said before, the Fourth Succession War was never a done deal for us internally because we did have to build out a lot of tools to basically make what was from the ground up designed as a full sandbox experience into a very specific linear campaign. So like the tools to kind of build that out were pretty much challenging to make, but we do have those tools available to us now for future DLCs if we choose to go down that road.
Yeah. And there's obvious influence you can take from Harebrained Schemes Battletech. We've seen many other storytelling tools they've implemented in their game that could be easily taken across into something like MW5.
A lot harder than it sounds, but we can definitely look at other games for inspiration. But you have to understand is that our game's architecture is going to be much different from other games. So as easy as it is to kind of point to other examples and go, "This is what we want," you can basically say that as design, and it's very easy to pitch things, but then you take that to engineering and they go, whoa, that's not how our underlying systems are pretty much work. So sometimes that means that you just have to go back to the drawing board and like rework some things to work better with your underlying engine and stuff like that. Sometimes it means that what other games have done might not necessarily be what is best for your game because of how the underlying architecture is. So but we definitely look to everything else for inspiration.
Cool.
So going back a bit to the whole narrative thing, the Kestrel Lancers DLC, how did you choose which faction's POV to focus on? Why not go from the Lowrey POV for a change?
Yeah.
So that all came down to pretty much the content that Art was producing. Very similar to like how we went with the Fourth Succession War based on what content Art was producing. That's how we also picked what the story was going to focus on. And the thing that really won over was, at the time, Art really wanted to focus on the mech factories that they were building out because they were building out interior play spaces where mechs can, go through the double-barreled doors and walk in and everything like that. So they wanted to have, a campaign that focused on that particular asset and the mega cities. Those were like kind of the two things. And so whenever you say mech factories in the Fourth Succession War, Tikhonov basically becomes the place that you have to pretty much, at least touch on, because that was the biggest, that was pretty much one of the biggest battles of almost the entire Fourth Succession War that revolved around the acquisition of a mech production factory, considering they are so rare in the
Yeah.
lore and in the universe. And so by production basically saying that we want a mech factory to be kind of front and center, that pretty much solidified Tikhonov as the place that we were going to have to center our entire campaign around, or at least as a jumping off point. And because Tikhonov was then solidified, that means that we have to kind of dive into lore and see who interacted with Tikhonov, and that's pretty much where the Crucius Lancers come in, because in the lore, the only people who invaded Tikhonov were all 8 battalions of the Crucius Lancers. They were handpicked from, Hans Davion himself basically said, you are the ones who are going to take this incomparable system. And so at that point, we charted out all 8 of the Crucius Lancers regiments and kind of, looked at both what they did in their campaign to try to pick out interesting points, but also like where we wanted the players to go. And the unfortunate thing with the Crucius Lancers, and also with the Fourth Succession War, is that it was a blitzkrieg where most of the interesting stuff kind of happened at the very front of things. And so there was always the option to pretty much pick more recognizable Crucius Lancers regiments, like the 7th or 8th, that had a much more integral role in fighting those really big battles in Tikhonov. But what we really wanted in the campaign was we really wanted to have players go from the beginning to the end of the conflict. And so Tikhonov was one of the first planets invaded, so that was going to be our opening act. And so because we did want to have a sense of progression through the campaign, we couldn't really start Tikhonov off with like the big battles that were some of like the most epic fights in all the Succession Wars, because then players new to the franchise would drop into the campaign, just get their asses handed to them. So we ended up picking the second Crucius for a few reasons. The first reason was that they kind of they had a natural progression as far as the games, as far as a game campaign is concerned. On Tikhonov, they were kind of like the newer regiment with greener recruits, and so their one big contribution in the lore was taking Gizhiga and maintaining pretty much a garrison up until they pretty much tried to invade Tigris. At which point, and once they get to Tigris, they see a lot of combat because the second gets ambushed by Kur's intruders. That's all pretty much directly from the lore. They take the 4 cities, and then they're fighting this war with Laurel's Legion and Warrior House Hiritsu, pretty much for the remaining of the campaign. And so that basically allowed us to take low level action from Tikhonov into like medium level action of Tigris. And then because a lot of the Crucius Lancers in the lore like pretty much taper off as far as their natural progression, we knew we needed to kind of have an Act 3 that centered on kind of like a big climactic battle, because otherwise most players I think would get kind of disinterested in the campaign if it played out exactly like it was in lore, which was a lot of big fights for Tikhonov, but then the fights became significantly less intense in as the conflict wore on, and as the Capellan Confederation started whittling away towards like the tail end of the war. So Sarna, on the other hand, though, I guess I should say Act 3, just in case people don't want to spoil themselves. But so Act 3 in our campaign happened because that was it took place on a single planet for a long period of time that took us to most importantly the very end of the Succession War. And it was probably the site of the most intense fighting in all of the war, because it was an ambush, and for the most part those people who were trapped on Sarna were trapped on it for 6 months, just clinging onto survival throughout, which we felt was kind of you know, a good way to pretty much end the campaign that gets players excited to participate in it. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much how we navigated from you know, pretty much the lore accurate stuff from the second Crucius, and kind of navigate into the battle of Act 3 for the most part.
Okay. Now,
Yeah,
I just have
And
one
then
other
on the other side, had you chosen Liao, obviously Liao got stomped all the time, so clinging with one perspective wouldn't have been easy. You would have been forced to basically switch unit every mission and such.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not just that, but also like Liao was put into a no-win scenario, like where they were spending the entire war either fighting to the death or retreating. And even like their most successful, you know, strike against Davian were, you know, small raids, you know, into Davian space that, you know, in the end were kind of set up. And also, you know, the Battle of Sarna was, for the most part, a big victory for them up until it wasn't. So it's one of those things where, as a player, you don't want to necessarily just like enter a campaign where you're just going to feel bad throughout the entire campaign.
Yeah.
Good choice, actually. Then, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
also, I imagine how the missions play out. You know, it's very difficult to do a fighting retreat and script that perfectly without the player getting bogged down in combat.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just that, but also like structuring an entire campaign around a retreat. Like it's one thing to do like one mission where, you know, it's
Rear guard.
effectively, yeah, it's a centerpiece, you know, mission if you do it once. But if you structure an entire campaign around an aggressive retreat, like I don't think that, you know, most players would enjoy that kind of content, so to speak.
True.
Yep, you're always seeding the field, so no salvage. That's extra fun.
Yeah,
Mhm,
yeah,
of course.
exactly.
So, for future narratives, say you do another Castralancer-like deals in the future, are you gonna put the which faction to focus on a bit more in the foreground, or is that also gonna be whatever works out, works out?
Well, for us, it really comes down to the gameplay and what we want. I think the thing about the Fourth Succession War is that it happened over a 2-year period of time, 3 years if you count, you know, the Galahad War games that kind of acted as almost a prologue to it. And so, if we were to do another lore-centric conflict, it really comes down to what is the experience that we want the players to, you know, have, as well as like what the conflict itself, you know, plays like when you actually get it into the game. So I know that, you know, you guys mentioned things like the War of 3039. Like the thing about the War of 3039 would be pretty much, you know, you're once again allying with, you know, Davian or Kurita, but that entire conflict only takes place over the course of a single year. So it would effectively be half of the timetable that you would get from the main Kestrel Lancers campaign. So the question is that if we were to use the Kestrel Lancers campaign, but you only had half the amount of time to pretty much, you know, interact with those missions, would that be, you know, just as compelling content as it was in Kestrel's, or is there another thing like the Andurian Crisis or the Ronin Wars or Rassilog Independence or any of those other major conflicts out there that you know, might suit those might suit that gameplay experience a bit better? And that's like really where we come down. So we'll never discount the War of 39. But it really comes down to pretty much like, is that the kind of best application for these systems, or is there other conflicts that
Yeah.
are better suited to this?
It's a question sort of that just popped into mind, sort of like in regards to MechWarrior 5's storytelling, what would you say is its biggest selling point? What would you you know, how would you sort of sell it to somebody who coming into the game?
It depends.
Because you know, we're talking about all these historical battles and stuff. So is it, you know, if you've read it in the books, you can recreate it in the games, or is it, you know, really fun to, you know, be there in self, in person, etc.? How would you, how do you sell the narrative to, you know, prospective audience?
It's kind of tough because for the most part, the sales pitch of the DLC is pretty much for Legend of the Kestrel Lancers is we're thrusting you right into the middle of these epic conflicts in that take place within the greater narrative of the Battletech universe. But in the base game, it's really focused more on the player's experience in the overall arc of the inner sphere, so to speak. So it's much more centralized on what the player experiences, and that's why we don't really have anything in the core campaign that really connects to anything in the overall lore, specifically, because we structured the entire campaign to take place over a 35-year period of time, where the players have an open sandbox with the entire inner sphere at their feet, where they can travel around and experience the game as they want to. So it comes down to at the base game level, it's an open sandbox where you have to, seek out revenge for your family within the greater context of the inner sphere. But for something like the Kestrel Lancers, it is this very specific event is happening. We're going to thrust you right into the middle of the action. So the sales pitch becomes different depending on what aspect of the game you're really trying to sell, because the base game is very different from the experience that the Kestrel Lancers provides.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a giant sand pit over here that's the base game, and then there's an extra little sand pit over here that you have to go, from one corner to the next.
Yeah.
Sand
So
pits.
for the next question, Bada, you've put that one pretty good in the last episode. Would you like to take it over?
Yeah. So, what is the primary theme and message that you wanted to try and carry through in the storytelling with the Kestrel Lancers?
I mean, like all MechWarriors, we want the storytelling to really revolve around the player's experience of building a mercenary command in the inner sphere throughout this particular period of time. But in Kestrel Lancers, it's really build your mercenary unit and participate in the Fourth Succession War, like this epic conflict that happened within the lore, and that you ask any Battletech fan, they'll probably know about it just by mentioning its name. And for those coming to the franchise, this is your chance to take place in an epic battle on a scale that you would never see like as an individual mercenary command.
Yeah. Here's a sort of follow-up question a bit. Like, you were responsible, of course, for figuring out, what campaign this fits into and whatnot. But who wrote all the individual bits? Like, in regards to theme, I think why we brought this up was that in the actual missions, your companions, your fellow crew members, would talk often about the many war crimes that are taking place.
I remember this the last one. Sorry, go ahead.
And I was wondering, so was there conscious what part did you play in that? Were you writing everyone's dialogue? Did you instruct everyone to have a consistent theme throughout every mission? Like, war is hell. Hell. Let's make sure to remind the players with our crew members. How did that come into being?
Well, it comes back to so I guess to answer your question more directly, I didn't write everything, but I did write a large chunk of what was seen. There was a lot of editing passes as well as other smaller bits that might have been written by other designers or people who want to take part in the overall story. But as the narrative director for this expansion, like I had to kind of manage everything that pretty much went in. And the big thing as far as like the overall theme is that we needed it to fit with what was already present in the base game, because in the base game we have this open-ended campaign that allows you to side with House Lau and other different disparate parts of those people of the inner sphere throughout the core campaign. And so we wanted to make sure that thematically it fit with everything that already existed in the game. And so that means that as a mercenary, you're not really particularly loyal to any one particular house. Like, you're loyal to the people who are employing you and giving you the contract, which kind of allows you, and also that's like another thing as well.
Yeah,
Is
though
that
if you're a mercenary, that often should sort of imply neutrality or very much being familiar with the harshities of war.
yep. Well, the other thing as well is that whereas the Battletech books, and especially the Warrior trilogy, focus on exclusively highborn characters. So if you read Michael Stackpole's book about this conflict, nearly every single person that you follow in those books was either born into or is now a part of the upper elite of the great houses. And that's just not a perspective that the mercenary games, especially ours, where your character is from an unknown history that is kind of disconnected from the goings on of the inner sphere. So we really wanted the campaign to be much more about like the boots on the ground. So rather than the eye in the sky look that you get in the Warrior trilogy, you are the ones that are on the ground actually getting the work done, and you kind of see kind of the duality that these conflicts kind of present themselves with, because the populace of Tikhonov and Tigris in particular are people who really flourished within the confines of the Capellan Confederation. Like they were allied with them for years, and they were both the wealthy families as well as the centers of industry for that entire nation. So their populace's perspective of the goings on of the Capellan Confederation are probably a lot different than what other people's perspective in like the farm worlds and stuff for the Capellan Confederation. So we wanted to really kind of preserve that more boots on the ground look that MechWarrior games are supposed to provide players with. And also, again, be an introduction into the universe itself, because again, MechWarrior games are kind of those first layers of exposure for a lot of players to the IP itself.
I get it in that sense, and I also get the perspective from the Leo soldiers in particular during the Mech Factory raid, the kind of glimpses you got on their side. But I think the main thing that really put me off, and the one thing that I would happily cut out of the campaign altogether, is Fahad and his very strong opinions.
Yeah.
And especially, like, how do you do a major invasion, the biggest invasion in decades, and then there's a mech tech on the comm line with the commander of the operation? How does that work in the military?
So a lot. We know that I definitely know that Fahad is definitely rubs some people the wrong way. But the problem with Fahad is that I inherited him from the base campaign. I can't get rid of him and replace him because he is a consistent character that was put into the base game well before I took over any of the narrative elements of the story. And so he really, serves, at least in Legend of the Kestrel Lancers, he kind of serves as like that audience surrogate for those people who are unfamiliar with the IP to really ask kind of the questions. And it's one of those things where it doesn't really make sense to really introduce a new character because we would have had to keep him centered in the Davian campaign. And the only other person in the player sphere that you have to work with is Rihanna and Fahad are pretty much it when it comes to players within the sphere of influence, of the player that come into it. And Rihanna has been a mercenary for generations, so she already knows all this. And so Fahad, just by default, pretty much becomes that vehicle for us to kind of transmit those, those ideas of the IP itself, and to kind of give those themes, and also allow us to elaborate on those things that most players might ask coming to this franchise for the first time.
Okay.
Yeah, I still think it would have been much better if he had been on comm channel with Rihanna and then Rihanna giving you the exposition dump rather than, Jackson Davian, the high-level commander, talking to a simple mech tech.
Yeah,
that was weird.
Well, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where the base game really only revolves around 3 characters, which is pretty much the main character, Rihanna, and Fahad. There's no one else that we kind of have from that core experience that we can kind of translate to it. So, love him or hate him, he is like one of the 3 characters that we have to work with when it comes to those kind of exposition things. And he also kind of serves as someone who isn't trained as a mech warrior, isn't trained as like a mercenary. Really, he's just a tech that might have. So he becomes like just a natural kind of default that allows us to ask those questions for that an experienced mech warrior or mercenary might not know.
Yeah, I
So
find it just it's a bit odd with when you say asking those questions, sort of that you're starting the invasion. Fahad gets on the radio with the commander in chief. It's like, but war, people will die, and it's the thing is you are a silent protagonist. You're not really actually there to go, oh, what is the meaning of life, or why am I taking part in these wars? You fill in the blanks yourself, but it becomes very different when you have one of your crew members who are sort of an extension of the player, bringing up moral questions, particularly when you have no way of really sort of answering them or changing the course of the war or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was just weird. Like, if I was Jackson Davian at that point, I would have been like, get your tag off the line or I'm going to have him executed. Yeah. Okay. That's basically my opinion on Fahad.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Love him or hate him, he's one of the few characters that is consistent throughout the storyline. And it's one of those things where, he is one of the 2 characters I have to work with outside of, the player character themselves when it comes to even engaging with characters that might be specific to the DLC.
So were you at all involved with the whole hiring voice actors and overseeing their recording sessions and stuff?
So how involved was I with that?
Yeah.
I was involved with a few of the big roles, like what is it? Like Jackson Davian, Arden Sortek, Alana Damu. I was pretty involved with those because those were like fairly big characters. But for a lot of like the smaller roles of people that only came in for like one mission or so, those were left up to the audio team. And obviously, those characters that were imported in from earlier DLCs or the base game were already cast prior to my involvement with the narrative side of things.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit about how the casting process is for voice actors?
It's pretty straightforward. For the most part, we have the scripts written out, or at least part of the scripts written out, and a general idea of what the characters have to be. For Legends of the Kestrel Lancers, we had the benefit of all the lore that was already built out for these said characters, because they almost everyone that appears in Kestrel Lancers at least has some kind of grounding within the lore of the universe itself, and so that allowed us to kind of really narrow down the field for how characters like Jackson Davian or Alana Damu are supposed to be, because those are characters from the novels. And we tried to fit it as best as we could, but for the most part, I was only involved with mostly like the main characters, and because there's a lot of things to do in production, even though I was like the narrative director for this stuff, I still had to do the actual system design work for a lot of like the campaign stuff.
What I was wondering about, were the recordings done in a local studio, or were the voice actors recording in their own equipment?
So it's a mixture of both, depending on what it is. In fact, there's a few of the generic mech warriors in Legend of the Kestrel Lancers that are just 1-bit roles that were recorded in the studio by PGI staff. In fact, people like you might even, if you listen carefully enough, you might see Darren plays a few characters within the campaign, and some of our other designers play some of the minor roles in the campaign. But those bigger roles are usually handled, because of COVID, they're usually handled through the voice actors usually submitting stuff remotely. Sometimes it's through directed sessions, sometimes not. but for the most part, because of COVID, a lot of it is recorded on their end through their studios and then sent over to us. Whereas, a lot of the stuff that we record in our studios is more for those bit rolls that most of take place through the PGI staff, just getting their own lines in the game.
Okay. Yeah. I found that interesting compared to the first campaign that on the Orchestra Lancer stuff. The voice acting was just, I feel in general, better and like also quality-wise more equalized. Like, I don't know if someone has brought this up to you, but in the base campaign you have all the characters with their kind of voice quality, and then you have Spencer coming in, Elias Defexis, who just sounds completely different, who literally sounds like he's in a recording studio, while everyone else is kind of more in the world. And like with the Kestrel Lancers, it was more, everyone felt like they were in world and not in a recording studio, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, I do know that, so there was a lot of post-process that happens, in the game itself, because within the game, you're not necessarily hearing the audio through, crystal clear recordings. You're hearing it through pretty much radio comms with a lot of, battlefield interference on it. So even ally lines that have very subtle filtration on the actual performances to kind of make sure that it sounds like it's something coming in through comms and not something that's just, like recorded in a studio, for lack of a better term. Because I could tell you this, like having heard the temporary stuff before those kind of effects are put through it, it does sound incredibly weird to have direct studio recordings in the campaign without those things. But for Legends of the Kestrel Lancers, we did, because of the much more focus on the audio experience and also like the narrative storytelling, we did do some edits to the filtration that we did put on both allies and enemies, and that might have allowed it to sound a little bit more equalized than the base game. But because it's applied as a post effect, like any kind of change that we did to Legends of the Kestrel Lancers would be applied globally. So, if you were to play the campaign again, you might actually find that those audio recordings might have been cleared up a little bit because we adjusted those filters.
That's cool. So yeah, I mean, for future reference, if you're taking feedback, I love the voice actor of Jackson Devian. If you bring the character back, please hire him.
Yeah, no, we knew that that was the character to get right, not only because he's like a fairly big character in the lore, especially going into later timelines, but also because you spend just so much time with him, in the campaign. So we just wanted to really make sure that that was the role that we really need to make sure that we get right. Both
Absolutely.
Because for the most part, it's mostly him and Alana Damu and Colonel Westrick. Those are like the three guys that you spend the most amount of time talking to you. So,
yeah. So then, for questions, I kind of have one last topic that's close to my heart, which are the cinematics. The two of us talked on Twitter a bit about this, and you kind of mentioned that cinematics were not initially planned for the DLC. And just kind of something you were able to do more at the end. How do you feel about that? And like, what would you think would you think without the cinematics the experience would have been good enough?
I mean, it's tough to tell because the reason we got the cinematics in was because a lot of us on the internal team were pushing for it, and I think that really goes to show, kind of what a boon that the merger with EG7 has been, because for Heroes of the Inner Sphere and for the base game, a lot of those in-studio resources that we were able to tap to get those cinematics were the people who would normally be devoted towards marketing material. So, like for example, the guy who does the same cinematics for the game is also the guy that works on like the feature trailers and stuff like that. And because EG7 was kind of, and Petrol were taking the reins on the main marketing when it came to that wedding scene trailer, as well as the launch trailer for the game, that allowed us to free up resources on the internal team that we could throw into those cinematics, and it was something that we were very much pushing for internally, and I am glad that we were able to get around to it, and it was something that came up very late in the process. And it really is a testament to what Rob was able to put together in the short amount of time that he had to, really drive home what we, wanted to narratively put together. Because one thing that at least what I really wanted to do is I wanted to really make sure that the planets that you were invading weren't just dots on a map. Because when it came to the Fourth Succession War, each of those planets were invaded for a very specific reason, because those planets had characters all of their own, and if they were just dots on a map, like, it makes it really hard for players to invest into why this conflict is so important to the war effort. And so those cinematics were really something that we really wanted to focus on, to highlight why the battle for this planet was so important within the greater context of the war.
Yeah, if they're just dots on the map, you can't even click on the map whilst you're in the campaign.
Oh yeah.
Fair point. So maybe wishful thinking, but any plans to potentially add on a fourth cinematic in a future update for the DLC?
That's going to entirely depend on how well received the Kestrel Lancers is, and how well the sales and everything are. Like, it's unfortunate that we were only able to get to 3 cinematics. We would have loved to get to another one to kind of wrap up the story, but it was just one of those things that we were just physically running out of time at that point. So it really I feel stands as a testament to how important those cinematics are, because the ending for the campaigns with like those briefing text, that is pretty much how the Heroes of the Inner Sphere content was really produced, and that is potentially what Legends of the Kestrel Lancers could have been if we weren't able to get those cinematics in. So it really stands as a testament to how impactful those cinematics are, that it not only gets rid of like those walls of text, but also contextualizes things in a much more visual way for a visual media. But as far as getting a fourth one out, that's going to be completely not up to me. It's going to be entirely dependent on how well everything goes for
spam boss
without the cinematics. The whole story is only really primarily presented with text, and that's sadly sort of how it ends off. In my head, like, the funny way you could round it off is all you need to do is put a box next to Fahad, which is the AMS that they send you with no ammo, and he just has a voice line saying,
which is a
"Commander,
bug.
this is an awful, amazing piece of tech. It's a pity we have no ammo for it, and there's no mechs that can take it for like decades."
Now that stuff like that is pretty much just what is it? Those are bugs from the R&D phase, because you have to remember that the linear campaign is all new under the hood stuff, and so we pretty much had to do test runs to make sure that all the features themselves were working, and like things like the AMS were just one of those things where this DLC on the production side came in very, very hot, because we wanted to make sure that this experience was as epic as we can make it within the time that we presented to the players. And one of the unfortunate consequences of that is pretty much that there were some of those production hiccups, like that blank AMS, that were really there because it's literally the first thing that pops up on the debug stuff that were thrown in as effectively test bed stuff for us on the development side, that we just never got around to stripping out. But I will say though that we are aware of those things, and even though we did just publish an update, we are in the process of working on an update that gets a lot of those things fixed up, including like I think people have commented that some hero mechs or some out of timeline variants are in the Kestrel Lancers campaign when they're not supposed to. So like bugs like that unfortunately were not like critical bugs. we are going to get another update out to kind of fix those up. We're not going to leave them there.
I'm gonna say it's kind of funny. The fourth succession war ended because Deviant ran out of money, and the campaign didn't have a fourth cinematic because the studio ran out of money.
which is actually kind of funny because I know one of the feedbacks that we've seen about Fourth Succession War is that it ended very suddenly, and it's odd. This is kind of like the double-edged sword of being very true to the lore, is that when random stuff like that happens in the lore, you kind of have a question as a designer of, do you stick with, what happens to the letter, or do you have to, do you deliberately fudge things, specifically to make it feel better for the player? But this is like one of those things where the Battle of Sarna, pretty much, you're cut off from the rest of the Inner Sphere, and by the time the Battle of Sarna ends, like, the war has already been over for months now. Even in the novels and stuff, like, the novels end probably about a month and a half before the Battle of Sarna ends, because they were cut off. So they get the reinforcements, from House Davion, and the heavy guards kind of come in to save the day, and then they only find out that hey, war's been over for months. We're pretty much the cleanup crew.
Yeah, but I think I do very much agree sort of where Ian pushing just that a final cinematic to give a proper sense of denouement would be great, just showing how the map has changed with the invasion and talking about how the Federated Suns have all the financial issues and whatnot as a consequence of the crisis.
Yeah, we would have loved to do it, but as we said earlier, even getting those 3 cinematics in was very much a stretch goal for the team that we were pushing very aggressively for. But pretty much you should have seen the producer's faces when we even suggested it, because it's kind of just like, oh my god, because I think, like, when we initially pitched it, what they're going on in the back of their head is that it's like the opening cinematic to the campaign, where it's this long complex thing. And so we were able to, Rod, and I were able to find out a way that we can do it on a budget and still have, like, the impact, which is great. But even with all that stuff, we only have so much time to produce the content.
I mean, really, just having a voiceover at the end would
would
still
been nice.
be better than.
Well, I know that. Go on. I'm sorry.
Mission briefings were another thing that we really wanted to get in, but that was something where we actually ran out of time for, because when, as far as writing the campaign, when we get around to writing stuff, we start out with an outline that kind of outlines where everything takes place within the game itself, and then we write all the in-game stuff first, because that's the stuff that has to be cast through the voice actors, and we need to provide them with scripts so they can do auditions and everything like that. So the briefing text is kind of like the last thing that gets written, and so we were really pushing to try to get that in, but it just came down to, by the time, like, the briefing text was all written up, like, the voice actors were already pretty much done with all their voice recordings, and there was just no way that we can get them back. So,
well, I do know that, like, when you guys put in the graphic of the new dropship and the new jump ship cinematic, I was totally excited. I mean, I was like, thank God they changed the frickin' jump ship, jump in. I was like, yay, and then it went to the original one. So I put a mod in to take that out. But still, I was so excited about that. You don't understand. I was streaming, and I was like, oh my God, yes! Thank God they took that damn thing out. And but still, it was good though. It was really good.
Which ironically was a recycle job from the initial campaign, because I think that's the cinematic that plays when you get off of the first planet in the initial campaign. And it was just one of those things where we wanted to signify that this is going to happen. Like, you will have these cinematics later in the campaign, but, like, the prologue was and the Galahad War Games was not, like, high intensity enough that it kind of justified producing, like, an entire cinematic for it. So that was just, like, our way of kind of priming the players for the cinematics that would show up later in the campaign.
I just thought you changed it, and I was just so excited. But then I was let down after that.
I got
no.
just super confused when I saw it because I had the mod that disables jump ships animation. I'm like, shit, did the mod get broken during the update? There's a jump ship animation. And then I realized it's
Okay. Okay. I think that's it actually for all the different questions that we have, right?
Okay.
Yeah, on my end, I kind of burned through the important questions, and we are also already over time. So, Bob Bider, do you have any closing questions for Chris while he's still here?
Not really, just great job, pretty much. Love the narration, and I wish you went with option 2 and 3, but that's just me. But hopefully in the future that'd be kind of cool to go ahead and see. I would love to see that because I'm a big lore freakazoid. So like seeing Art in Crisis and seeing that the War 3039 would be kind of cool to go ahead and go and be part of. Especially for the franchise that's out here now.
Yep.
Yeah. I only have broad sort of questions left in my head just regarding like the Kestrel Lancers DLC. Sort of how long was that in the pipeline and how many people worked on it, just roughly speaking?
So I can't talk on staffing, mostly because I just don't know. That would be a question for
Yes.
production. It's tough to know how big the staff is when I'm working in San Francisco and they're working in Vancouver. But as far as how long it took, it really depends on the department. So like I think I was on it for about I would say like 5 to 6 months, I think. But that was just for my contributions to it. The art team was working on it months before I was on. Like pretty much our team was working on it while we were still knee deep in Heroes of the Inner Sphere. So it really just kind of depends on the department. So production would unfortunately be the one that you'd have to talk to for like a scope on how the entire thing went down.
So, when did you stop working on the Kestrel Lancers DLC? Just before launch?
Oh,
or
probably like a few weeks ago, like after launch, because you have to remember, as I said, the Legend of the Kestrel Lancers came in incredibly hot, and we know that there were a number of unfortunate bugs that made it in that were not like. They weren't game breaking, so it's one of those things that we want to wrap up in an update. So we've been working on, making sure that those bugs do get fixed up, and we will be addressing them in a future update.
Yeah, and speaking of addressing future updates, there's one thing that I completely forgot to mention earlier that I do kind of want to relate to you. Going all the way back with MechWarrior Online, we on this podcast often critique PGI for their way of communication to the player base. And with the Legend of Kestrel Lancers, you've done something that you really haven't done at all as a studio. And I don't know if you're the right person to address this to, but we felt this was a really positive change because PGI in the past has not been great at being open in their communication. As much as Darren and other people are trying, it's not really the strong suit of your company. So the alternative that you went with the Legend of the Kestrel Lancers is just being silent about it, shushing up altogether, and then just immediately throw it up. By the way, next week, DLC.
Yeah.
That was a really good way for PGI, and I do want to say I hope you're going to be keeping this kind of style. As much as I would like to know way in advance, this is really good for expectation management, and I have never been so hyped about a PGI title as I have been about the Legend of the Kestrel
that was
Lancers.
total out of third base, man. I was sitting there going, oh my God, there's something coming out. I didn't even know anything about this. It was good. That was really good.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, that's all on Matt and Darren, but it's also, kind of a testament to our partnership with EG7 and Petrol because both of those really took the reins on the marketing side, and we wouldn't have been able to get those really nice trailers if it wasn't for the hard work from those guys over at Petrol. And we wouldn't have had their support without EG7. So it really kind of, came down to, what we're now able to do now that we're, a part of a much bigger family than when we were going it alone and being independent.
Yeah, so definitely compliments from us on the way you launched the Kestrel Lancers. That was the best launch I've seen from Piranha Games. And that makes me very excited for future releases you guys have planned.
Yep.
We're hoping for. By the way, DLC coming out tomorrow. That would be even
Yeah.
better.
Well, that's how No Man's Sky does it. Basically he puts up a picture, and then boom, next day it comes out a big patch, like a big DLC for it. So it's good, and that's a good way to do it. And but wow, it was good. It was way good.
Yeah, the only thing I can say for certain at this point is we will be doing an update to fix a lot of the bugs that we know still exist in the game, and past that, stay tuned, because we definitely are continuing to work on some things. But as to what those things are, we'll have to wait and see.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Wait and see. And just suddenly, out of nowhere, get an email. By the way, next week you can buy this.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, Bob Bider, if you don't have any final questions, I would like to thank you again for being on the podcast, Chris. Do
Yeah,
you
thanks
have
for
any
having
last words?
Thanks everyone for supporting Legend of the Kestrel Lancers, as well as just the Battletech franchise as a whole. We hope you guys are enjoying it, and stay tuned. We got more coming, both on the MechWarrior side of things, as well as the CGL Battletech side of things.
Yay.
Yes.
And with that, thank you
That's
all
it.
for listening to the First Circuit Podcast, episode 175. Today's special guest, Chris Lowrey
75?
from Pyronic Games / Catalyst.
57.
57, did I Oh god, I messed up the numbers. 157. Special guest Chris Lowrey. Today is October the 23rd. See,
Yes.
I'm not senile quite
Okay,
yet.
there you go.
So it won't be out on the 23rd. Also, our hosts here today are the usuals, like me, Biter, Blark.
Me, Bob. Hello, Barry. And Ian.
Myself, Ian Treseri, and of course, special guest Chris. Thank you again for
Thanks, everyone.
listening, and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.
Take it easy.
Bye bye.